Thank you everyone for coming back to the second day of the Helsinki Security Forum. Yesterday was so good and well into the evening that I'm very happy to see this many people coming back for the second morning. So I'm Teri Schultz. I'm a journalist covering NATO and the European Union in Brussels, and a long-time close friend of Finland and student of Finnish politics and international relations. So I'm very privileged to be here and very excited to be kicking off this panel with my array of experts here. So we are going to be talking about the new geostrategic area in the north and how much and what kind of replanning that means for northern defense. Let me introduce my panel here. Starting at that end, Søreide Eriksen. Eriksen Søreide, sorry about that, Ina. She's the chair of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and Defense for the Norwegian Parliament. Pekka Toveri, he is the former director of Finnish Defense Intelligence. Jesper Møller Sorensen, the State Secretary for Foreign Policy in the Danish Foreign Ministry. Kristi Raik, she's the director of the Estonian Foreign Policy Institute, ICDS, and François Heisbourg. He's the senior advisor for Europe at IISS and special advisor for FRS. And we are going to now kick off this panel talking about what the new threats mean here in the north, how the responses should be shaped based on what's happening in the neighborhood, and of course based on the decisions that the countries of the north are now taking. It's been a very exciting time in Helsinki, in Stockholm, and in Brussels. And I think it's the perfect time for the Helsinki Security Forum to be launched and also to launch into these topics. So we're going to start off with Ina, because we were trying to coordinate this panel and she simply had too many meetings, too many crises. And so I'm expecting that we're getting the latest from the Norwegian point of view on what's happening, including, Ina, of course, the new pressure on Norway as one of the fuel providers for Europe. And the other array of threats that we're facing here now. So, Ina, please start us off.
Thank you so much, Teri. And it's absolutely fair to say that the last few days have been especially hectic for anyone dealing with policies in parliament or in government. And I think several of us here in the panel actually also have been quite busy with a lot of decision making. And it is absolutely no doubt that what happened in the Baltic Sea the other day is something that has upended a lot of the discussions to an even greater extent than it already was. And there is absolutely no secret that this was a major challenge even before the latest actions this last week. And I think it's fair to say that even though things have not been fully assessed yet, it's fair to say that it is one country that has an interest in doing what has been done right now and doing a sabotage operation towards gas pipelines, and that is Russia. So even though it has not been attributed yet, I think it's all the reason to believe that that is the case. And if that is the case, it fits right into a pattern of Russian behavior, not only right now, but also over time. And one of the things that we're seeing with the hybrid threats that I think we will see more of in the future, in the weeks and months to come, is how they have been created just specifically for this reason, to cast doubt into decision-making processes, to cast a lot of fear into countries and to the populations in different countries. And of course, when you listen to Putin's speech yesterday, that was supposed to be the victory speech, but if you look at the faces of everyone around, it doesn't seem like much of a victory or a joyous day in a way. You also hear him talking about how Western countries do not care about their citizens. And a part of that is, of course, to continue what they've already done for a long time and exacerbated by this attack, that right now, it's also about an information war, information confrontation, as they like to call it in Russia, where you try as best as you can to sow division, not only between countries, but also within countries, to put pressure on Western governments so that they will back away from sanctions and back away from supporting Ukraine. So all of this mix is part of a so-called perfect storm in a way, where I think the most important thing that we can do is to continue to stand united, because if there is even a small piece of division between Western countries now, that will be used and abused by Russia to actually continue what they're doing at the moment. So we are in, of course, a special position because we're now the biggest provider of gas to Europe. And I mean, we put our pride, of course, into being a very stable and very predictable provider, as we've always been. But that has also entailed that we right now have undertaken some new measures in order to monitor and also protect the installations more than we have done in the past years for natural reasons. And also, we've seen a lot of unidentified drone activity in our installations or around our installations that, of course, has raised the alert level to an even higher degree. So I think it's really a situation that underlines the darkness of what is happening right now. And as I've said in several occasions before, this is it's a very typical Russian pattern where they continue until they are actually stopped. And as I think 2008 in Georgia was a time where Russia read the message of lack of Western support, they continued to annex Crimea with little or no consequences, basically, and they continued because they were not stopped in any meaningful way, and then continued to attack Ukraine on the 24th. So in my opinion, the real watershed in Europe was in 2014, and the fact that there was too little of a response to stop the continuation of attacks on Ukraine.
So Ina is always fearless if anyone else has followed throughout her career, but this is a good time for me to remind also our online audience who is joining us. You can tweet some news. The attribution is something that other countries have not been willing to do. So my journalist ear hears this and says, okay, Norway is going out there with this. I mean, of course, it's sort of the unspoken name. Most countries are not willing to attribute yet. So
this is no official attribution from Norway's side either. But I mean, if you look at all the patterns, I think, and analyze who is willing to and who has the interest of doing this, I don't think there are too many countries on that list.
It's true. Okay, and the hashtag is hashtag HSF2022. Anyway, because I forgot to say that at the beginning. So now moving to Jesper, who I think will add perhaps a few more details. Denmark, of course, was among the first to alert the world about what was happening, sent your military ships into the waters. We saw those dramatic pictures. What can you add to what we know right now? And again, going back to the title of our panel, Replanning Northern Defense, what does this incident tell us about what countries surrounding the Baltic Sea are going to have to do now, something we didn't perhaps expect at this moment?
Thank you very. Does it work?
No, it's not on.
Good morning, everyone.
There we go.
Yeah, I think it's there. And thank you very much, Teri. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here in Helsinki. Just to continue where Ina kicked off. I mean, first of all, we are not in a position to make any attribution officially. Let me just start out by saying that. But just a couple of points. It is interesting to note the position of where this took place. It did not take place in Swedish or Danish territorial waters, but in the economic zones. I think that's one point just to notice.
It's technically international waters.
Which is international waters, but for the two countries who has the economic zones, there are some obligations because of safety and environmental concerns, which also gives us a part of an obligation when it comes to the investigation. It also means that other countries can be invited into an investigation. We have just established we are establishing a joint investigative team. It's within the EU framework. It will consist of Germany, Sweden, and Denmark as the most affected countries to initiate the investigation. As you have probably seen, due to the gas leakage, it is not yet possible for physically to access the point. My understanding is, but there has been discussions about when it exactly is, but perhaps the first pipeline will be able to be accessed by tomorrow, and then there is some uncertainty about when the next one. It's simply a matter of how much gas pressure is still coming out.
When you say accessed, you mean that you'll be able to get close to it to actually
Yes.
assess the damage?
Yeah.
And you can't do that yet?
Not yet.
Because of the...
I mean, you can get closer,
flow of gas.
but you can't get physically down, and you cannot get down underwater yet. But I think within the next couple of days, certainly for the first pipeline, that should be possible.
Okay.
The other thing to notice, I think, is that the timing of when this happened. This was the day before the opening of the Baltic pipe. The opening of the Baltic pipeline coming from Norway to Poland. Again, I'm not making any accusations, I cannot, but I think it is suspicious. And of course, we had the debates in the UN Security Councils yesterday. There was obviously an attempt by one country to try to put this issue on the agenda. I think that was not successful. I think there was a concerted effort by a majority of countries to make sure that the real focus yesterday was on the session on the illegal referendums that had taken place in Ukraine. But I'm saying this because there is, of course, again, a suspicion that there seems to be an interest in diverting attention away from the real thing, which is what also I think UN Secretary General have put in very blunt terms, a clear violation of international rule. And actually even also underlining that this was an event that should be condemned by the international community. Now, there was one country that did not support the resolution, but had Russia not vetoed yesterday, that resolution would have passed in the UN Security Council. So moving forward, we will initiate the investigation. We are putting together the framework around this. The core group of this will be the 3 countries, the relevant authorities, police and others. And then you ask to the broader ramifications of this. And I think as Ine was alluding to, this stoked fear in all of us. Where are we with energy security, also in terms of the infrastructure around this? What will be the next step and so on? But I think this is why it is so important that we focus on the disinformation and misinformation campaigns coming out. We have to be very adamant to contest and to get real, reliable data and facts out in the public sphere. This is a key priority now for all of us.
Just a quick follow-up on that. The statements coming out of both NATO and the European Union are still if-then statements. If this were a deliberate attack, it would call for a united and robust response, things like this. But at the same time, the countries involved say there's no way this was anything but a deliberate attack. So why are these still hypothetical statements?
Well, I think what the statements wanted to say, especially the NATO statement, was to say, it's very difficult to see that this should be a coincidence. It seems very much that this was a deliberate attack, and then putting kind of a warning sign up there that any future similar would be met with a resolute response.
Warning what?
Warning.
Oh, yeah, but what kind of response?
But I mean, as usually in diplomatic language, we will let you guess about that.
No, I think it's anybody's guess. I will welcome contributions from the floor when we start taking questions. So Pekka, moving to you, what will it take to beef up defense in the Baltic Sea? What would it take to both protect against, I mean, if it's even possible, protect against unexpected attacks like this or anything else that we're looking at in the future now that this will be a NATO sea, presumably?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for possibility to be here. And first of all, I have to say this is extremely vital issue especially for us Finns, because we are living here in the cul-de-sac of Europe. It's far away from Central Europe, and our trade, almost 90% of our trade goes to the Western Sea lines of communications. And if somebody disturbs those, well, I'm not worried about food and gas and strategic spare parts. We have 3 to 6 months stockpiles for that, but I've been told that we run out of coffee in a couple of weeks.
Oh God, no.
And so this is a vital issue, and I think that our Baltic brothers and sisters face the same issue. And disturbing this, there are a lot of different ways. We've seen only one. And I think that when Putin has seen that his conventional war is not really going too well, he goes back what he did very successfully over a decade against us, going to the hybrid and using all the possible hybrid warfare ways and means to keep us unbalanced and unsafe. And I think that the most important thing here is, when I was young and beautiful, not now only, and I was an army officer, I didn't like to be reactive. I wanted to be proactive, and we have to be more proactive on this. We are now grading and reacting and seeing that, okay, well, there was this Greek ship with a lot of connection to Russia going around, or there were these Russian ships going around, and tracking what has happened, when we have to be much more proactive, seeing what's going to happen. And this means that we have to have in the Baltic Sea much closer cooperation, not only between the militaries, but all the civilian authorities. So we have a perfect situational awareness, proactive situational awareness. Who's coming to the sea? What kind of ship? How they've been acting before? What can be expected, so that we keep eye and prevent these kind of events? Because it's not only that you blow up pipelines, you can drop a couple of mines to the water, and immediately the insurance premiums go sky high, and you have a lot of problems. There are a lot of different ways, and we have to red team and think about this together. NATO is a good framework for military actions, and sure we have to take care that in the future that hopefully NATO has plans on place and capabilities on place, so that we can take care of Kaliningrad, because that's the biggest threat to any sea communications towards north. But then these hybrid threats that require much closer cooperation with all the authorities in this area.
And you're saying this even in an area that is one of the most integrated in the world. Who cooperates more closely together than the Nordic countries? There are a few regions that do. Yep. So you're saying that there needs to be even more cooperation there, or are you talking about integrating more NATO countries, more European Union countries?
Well, I'd say that the threats can come farther away, but I said even between Nordic countries, yes, we have a long tradition being cooperating a lot, but there are still stovepipes and pipelines, and for example. Definitely intelligence organizations have a lot of information which they don't share. And now we have to look ways when military and civilian sides can talk more closely, look the threats, as I said, red teaming, look to the future, try to predict what can happen and keep eye on possible threats coming outside our area. And that requires larger cooperation than not just in the Baltic Sea area. Again, if somebody already is at Baltic Sea with some mischievous plans and have assets there, we are too late.
But I mean, Finland and Sweden were expecting hybrid attacks. Were warning Russia that they knew they would be coming, but this wasn't one that I remember being mentioned. I don't know if Rasmus is here from Hybrid COE. Maybe they had it in their reports.
Well, there actually, I think 2009 there was a war game between some Nordic countries and US, where this was one possible threat that somebody uses the Nord Stream 1 to create hybrid effects and cause panic and give a permission Russia to put assets in the area. So it's been thought well ahead.
Okay, so Kristi, moving to you, could this have been something that was protected against? I mean, should there have been more defenses already in place, knowing that hybrid threats, especially after the Finnish-Swedish application, would be coming? And how much does this then reinforce what was already becoming a harder line between the West and Russia, which is something that you've been writing about lately?
Well, I would say what we have seen happening during the past couple of weeks shouldn't be particularly surprising to anybody. We have been a target of hybrid attacks previously, and I don't think, unfortunately, the explosions of Nord Stream were the last kind of incidents that we saw. And we have been facing a lot of cyber attacks over actually decades in Estonia. We've been living with this since 2007, and we also could hear from the speech of Putin yesterday that nothing has changed in his strategic thinking or his worldview. Even more strongly than before, he was portraying the West as an enemy and expressing his deep bitterness about what he sees as the West kind of taking away Ukraine from Russia. This is the way he is presenting the situation. And I think he has not learned anything from his mistakes. I think the fundamental mistake is that he keeps denying agency to Ukraine. And this was the core mistake that led him to start the invasion in February. And he sticks to the same position. And he continues to underestimate Ukraine, and I think also underestimate the West, because with every step that he makes to try to make us even more afraid and try to make Western countries to take a step back and reduce their support to Ukraine and somehow get paralyzed even, is actually making us stronger and more determined and making more efforts to defend ourselves, be it militarily or be it in the realm of hybrid threats. And actually, I don't think Russia has achieved that much with the hybrid warfare that it has been conducting for many, many years. And now we see it has not achieved much with military warfare either in Ukraine. So yesterday's speech was an attempt by Putin to try to make defeat look like victory. But there was some sense of déjà vu from 2014 speech after the annexation of Crimea, but I very much agree with what was said already. We didn't see happy faces. I didn't sense the kind of jubilant mood. So I think it's not so easy for him to sell this image of victory anymore to people around him and even the population of Russia. It's getting more difficult. So this also allows us to draw some conclusions already about where we are heading with the European security order. There was a good discussion on that yesterday already, and the point made by Andrew Mihta about the war in Ukraine being a kind of moment of system change. We don't know yet what the outcome will be, but we can see some features of the new reality emerging that are very important for our region. And one is this emergence of a hard border, or re-emergence of a hard border between the West and Russia. And it's not something that we would particularly like to have, but it's just something that we need in order to defend and protect ourselves. We need to have this hard border characterized by a strong military presence, which has been reinforced now with the latest NATO decisions in Madrid, but it's work in progress. And also with this deep cleavage between the political systems of the totalitarian regime in Russia on the one side, and then the democratic systems in the West on the other side, that we need to protect from authoritarian influence. And also it means reduced interaction economically, getting rid of our vulnerabilities and dependencies, and it means reduced people-to-people contacts. So this is the new reality we are having, and we are also seeing diminishing of kind of any sort of gray zones between the West and Russia. With the Finnish and Swedish NATO accession, and also with the EU enlargement process now going on vis-à-vis Ukraine and Moldova. And the reason for this is very simple. No European neighboring country of Russia wants to be in the gray zone, because Russia has shown that it tries to make the countries that are in the gray zone part of its sphere of influence. And no one wants to be in the Russian sphere of influence, because it doesn't bring you kind of development, or it doesn't bring people the ability to determine their own lives and have kind of rule of law in their societies. It's I think also a positive development to see these gray zones actually shrinking.
Just this reminds me, Ina, Norway is now the only country that is not restricting cross-border traffic with Russia, because Finland tightened it yesterday, I believe. Where is the discussion on that in Norway?
Restrictions, and we made some restrictions early on, but there is now a day-to-day discussion, or I would say hour-to-hour discussion on closing the border also for those who are coming over right now. And what we have seen, I suppose, both Finland and also Baltic countries have seen that Russia also has a tendency to regulate the flow of people coming to the border. So yesterday or the day before, suddenly it came to a halt. There was no one coming.
Because they won't let the men go. Mm-hmm. Because they won't let the men go.
No, yeah. Exactly. And then it opened up again on their side. But it is a discussion, and there is now, as of yesterday, the government has increased the surveillance and patrolling on the border, and also, of course, to look for something that I've been very concerned about is not only an influx of Russians who are fleeing the war or conscripts, but also the real risk of infiltration, that people could come over that has not any honest intentions of coming or not fleeing anything, but just mixing in with other people. So it is an increased awareness on this, and we have also been asking the government to be especially vigilant on this, because we remember well what happened in 2015, 2016, where Russians used, as a means of hybrid, I would say, used the influx of Syrian refugees to in a way, overflow the border in the north.
We all remember the bicycles abandoned on the Norwegian side. Yes. Okay, I'm going to come now. François, coming back to the title of the panel, what should be the priorities? How do we reprogram northern defense?
Yeah, before I get into that, just a remark on the diplomatic situation. With two things. The first, of course, is that we should thank Vladimir Putin for having reminded us through the gas pipeline explosions that this war is not simply about Ukraine, that it is a much broader war. As usual, we can count on Vladimir Putin to help remind everybody what is at stake. So we should offer him a medal. The other remark, which is not as pleasing, the references to the UN Security Council meeting. What I noted from the Security Council meeting was that India, China, Brazil, amongst others, abstained in the vote of the resolution. This is not a diplomatic victory. I would normally have expected at least one, if not two, of these three countries to actually vote against the illegal annexation of territory. We are not doing well at the global level, and we should not kid ourselves. We have a lot of work to do. It is not good enough to say Russia is isolated because they were the only ones to vote no on the resolution and with their veto right. No, we are still on the back foot on that one. Now, replanning. There's just a few words which I would like us to take on board. First of all, we are witnessing a geostrategic transformation as a result of Finland and Sweden joining NATO. Since the creation of NATO, which is now, what is it, more 73 years, the geostrategy was very simple. We had in effect two segments of NATO, one which was the Atlantic maritime segment, the Western approaches, UK, Norway, and we had the land bridge from Brest in Brittany to Brest-Litovsk and beyond to the Urals. The first one, of course, being a maritime and air domain, and the second one being essentially a land and air domain. That was the case even during the post-Cold War era. Now, all of a sudden, we have, where there was a strategic void, a cul-de-sac, I think was the expression which was used by Pekka. Others would say buffer states, Sweden, Finland. We now have all of a sudden a new space. And here I move to a second form of words, which is the Baltic as I use a German word, Binnenraum. It's inside of us. It's no longer between us or side of us, it's part of us. The more trivial image would be to say it's like NATO is now like a donut, with the Baltic being the hole in the donut. Except that there's a bit of a problem, and that is the hole in the donut is not really a hole, it is full of crème chantilly, and you want to protect the crème chantilly. But this is a domain which is mostly maritime and digital and the like. This is a new space to defend in NATO. We don't have the command structure for the moment to deal with this new space. How will Finland, Sweden, Poland, Germany, Denmark, Norway get together within NATO to form some sort of command structure to handle this new area, the hole in the donut, if I can put it that way. That's planning ahead. It's in part, of course, accelerated by what we've witnessed with the pipelines. All of a sudden, people realize that there's stuff down there which is quite important, and that we had better maybe start having an integrated approach to how we deal with the Baltic. And the third word I would use is, of course, the Baltic as a hub. And the hub, of course, has existed for centuries in the field of trade. It even at one stage existed politically, if we go back to the Hansa era. But now it is becoming a strategic hub as well. And once again, we do not, for the moment, have anything in NATO which covers that particular requirement. And I would argue that one of the things, if I were in a non-think tank position, I would say it is actually quite urgent for the countries of the region, in partnership, of course, with their other allies, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, etc., that there should actually be some sort of collective reflection and then decision on how to structure this Baltic space with all of its infrastructure assets and the infrastructure assets which it contains. NATO was not designed for this. It was not designed around this. Now it's going to have to be designed around it. And that, when President Niinistö yesterday was asking, what can Finland do for NATO? Well, I guess this is actually quite a good area to explore.
I think there is a plan for that inside NATO. The Finns and Swedes have been talking about it, but I will let them address that. But Jesper, you had your hand up first on my panel, and then Pekka wanted to address this. And then everybody out there, be thinking of your questions, because we are going to have a nice, generous chunk of time to have a conversation.
Am I on? Yeah. Okay. It was only that the comment on the diplomatic scene in New York. I should have stressed, of course, that it was disappointing, as you say, that we had 4 abstentions. But I still want to say that we also had countries like the UAE which this time actually voted in favor. I think both the two of the four countries that abstained, Brazil and Gabon, did it because of procedural issues. They actually did in their interventions say that this was against a violation of international law. But the main point is that I think that the upcoming vote that we will have within the next couple of days in the General Assembly, where all countries are voting, will be the real test. And of course, this is where the diplomatic outreach is now taking place, because I think it's a very important vote now. And the reason I kind of highlighted the success was that Russia did not succeed in putting all the focus on the session on the gas leaks. Quite the contrary, all attention was on the referenda. So that was the point.
Okay. Pekka.
Yeah, I totally agree about the need to look at the Baltic region and how NATO is going to build its command structure and so on. But I think that we shouldn't forget Arctic and handle that the same way, because Russia, the geostrategic situation will change to very unfavorable to Russia after Finnish and Swedish membership in NATO. And it's weak now that when its army is beaten by Ukrainians. But they are strong in Arctic. They are stronger than we are in Arctic region, because they've been militarizing it for 10, 15 years now. And since they are strong there, they want to keep themselves in a position of strength in the future. And that's something we can't forget when we start to look how we will go, how the NATO will restructure itself.
But it's fair to point out that the Arctic is always brought up as an example where cooperation with Russia was actually constructive, even when other things went badly. Nuclear and Arctic policy was kept somewhat stable and somehow separated from the rest of the disasters.
Yeah, but I'm afraid that time is not going to come back for a while.
Interesting.
I agree.
Ine.
Well, I also wanted to pitch in a little bit on the Arctic and what Pekka says, because you are absolutely right, Teri, that in the High North, there has been a saying of High North low tension, and the cooperation on everything from border patrol to search and rescue has largely been okay.
And maintained even when other things were cut off completely,
it has.
right?
Yeah, it has. And I think for the safety and security of people, it has been extremely important. But I also want to stress that from a Norwegian perspective, it has never been our ability to talk to the Russians in the north that has provided us with security. It has been our NATO membership that has given enough backing to actually have that kind of constructive and pragmatic cooperation on issues that have been of common interest. So we cannot fool ourselves into thinking that this has been something that has happened, would have happened without NATO in the same way, because our NATO membership, in a way, outweighs the asymmetry between our countries, both in size and power. And I also want to underline that two very interesting things will happen now when Sweden and Finland becomes NATO members, finally, many of us would say. One is that the cooperation, the very, very good Nordic cooperation we've had on the defense side for many, many years can now be taken one step further. There has always been a caveat. We haven't had the same defense plans. We haven't had the same security guarantees, which means that we have been able to do a lot of things on the exercise board and do it physically, but stopping where we could not do the same thing in crisis and war. Now we can. The second thing is that we will now be able to link what has always been a very interesting link between the Baltic Sea and the High North. And when I say that, and I've been saying this as both a defense minister and foreign minister for many, many years, that we have never expected a potential crisis to start in the north, but it would very easily and quickly come to the north if it starts somewhere else, typically in the Baltic Sea region. And the reason for that, of course, is that the Russians have, over years, reinvigorated their bastion defense concept. They still have most of their nuclear assets just outside our window. And they need to protect it, to get it out when they need to. And the strategic implication for NATO is huge, because it means that they can effectively cut off the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap and hamper Allied reinforcement to Europe. So to be able to see the link between the Baltic Sea and the High North will now be an enormous opportunity, I think, for enhancing NATO security in this region.
Kristi?
Well, I just wanted to pick up on this point about pragmatic cooperation with Russia, because I think this is important to actually note that what made people-to-people contacts and cooperation possible was to have the security guarantee from NATO. And the post-Cold War era was a time of a lot of wishful thinking about Russia in the West, and a lot of people kind of believing that if only we develop economic interaction and human interaction, we can actually have a positive influence on developments in Russia and our own security, on how to what extent Russia might be a threat to us. But now this is a time to reassess, and once there will be a change, let's say, we don't know when it will come, but a change within Russia and a change in the security situation, we should not kind of rush to, again, normalize relations and build again cooperation, but we should keep it in mind that it's having a proper defense capability and having hard power to back up whatever we do in the kind of softer sphere is going to be very important in the Russia relations.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to what you just said about the link between the Baltic and the High North. Similarly, to that North-South link, you also have the East-West maritime link. Well, NATO as an alliance has focused quite rightly over the decades on sea lines of communication and therefore of keeping open the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap and so on. But now, of course, we have the extra dimension, and here again the pipeline thing comes as a reminder, with all of the cables linking North America to Europe. I think we're at around 21 cables. You cut those, and they're much easier to cut than to cut the gas pipelines, by the way.
And there have been a lot of warnings about that.
And of course, Norway was well placed with the Svalbard problem last January with the data transfer cable, which was cut by unknown hands. I'm not sure whether Norway has actually attributed it now or not, but it certainly wasn't Martians who did the cutting of the cable up there. I am with Sweden as a member of NATO, which has a window both on the Baltic and on the North Atlantic. It would be interesting to see how we can establish the interface between the strictly Atlantic part of the defense and the Baltic part of the defense. And here again, so many things have changed over the last few years. What it means to defend the Atlantic is now very different from what it was even only 10 or 15 years ago.
Jesper, you want to say something else? And then I really want to open to the audience, because otherwise we're just having our own little coffee clutch here.
Open to the audience.
Okay, open to the audience. Who has questions? Yes, please tell me, please identify yourself and have a nice, short, concise question. And to everyone out there, keep the conversation going online at #HSF2022.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the excellent initial remarks. I'm Tero Vauras, the Senior Advisor with ICI and a Global Fellow with the Woodrow Wilson Center. Getting to the discussion on the Baltic Sea, so first of all, we should remember that it's not an inner sea of NATO. There is still Russian access from Kaliningrad and from St. Petersburg area. However, already since 1961, there's been collaboration on the area of icebreaking on the state agreement with the Nordic countries. So I would like to hear from our colleagues from Denmark and Estonia your views on the command structures and collaboration, especially in terms of NORDEFCO, as also the Baltic countries are on the radar of NORDEFCO, and this collaboration has been on the agenda with the comments within the past couple of weeks. Thank you.
Okay, would someone like to respond to that?
Let me just initially say that I think there is, going back to one of the points that were made before, there is a broader question here about command structures and so on that we need to look into now that Sweden and Finland becomes member of NATO. There's no doubt. I also think that discussion is already happening, as you alluded to, within NATO. I also think it is wise that we make sure that Finland and Sweden are full members before we take that discussion.
Well, I think you have already tried to make sure. It's not you that's the problem.
Well, yeah, that's true. Denmark was actually, together with Canada, the very first to hand in the ratification in the State Department.
Beat us by a day or two.
And sorry? Estonia was trying to get there.
They do too, yeah. Yes. There was a competition going on that one.
It was.
But what I would say about the Baltics, I think what we are focused on right now is that with the decisions that we made in Madrid, we need to make sure that our forward posture, the deterrence, is intact. Denmark, for instance, just to take ourselves, is right now engaged in enhanced forward presence in Estonia, with a battalion in Latvia, with air policing and our commitments also over Poland. I have to say we are stretched in a level of engagement which for us is not sustainable. We simply cannot maintain that. And of course, here I think there are some new opportunities now that Finland and Sweden are also joining NATO, for looking at how we as this grouping can have rotational shifts and so on, which were not possible previously. Let me also add that apart from Sweden and Finland joining NATO, I think another, maybe not global tectonic shift, but at least a Danish shift, which was quite important, was the lifting of our European defense opt-out. And just as an illustration of what it actually has meant, what's going on in our region with Putin's decisions, 66.9% of the Danish population voted yes to remove an opt-out, where I think that 1 year ago, that had not been possible. At least it would be very, very difficult, so it would not have been put out there. One of the reasons that I'm here in Helsinki to have discussions with my Finnish counterparts is it's exactly, and now I'll come a little bit closer to your question, to get close. We all say, with all of this new shift taking place, Sweden and Finland becoming very capable members of NATO, Denmark moving our opt-outs, this creates new opportunity for Nordic security and defense cooperation. All of us can see that there are some possibilities, but I think we need to make this more concrete and more exact. I'm not in a position right now to say, will there be new constructions? What does it mean for Nordefco and so on? But I think that these are some of the avenues that we need to explore now. And obviously, the whole Baltic Sea area, with all countries except one being members of NATO, puts us in a completely different and more positive, in terms of security, situation. And we need to build on this.
Okay, we have another question over here.
Thank you. My name is Mats Löfström. I'm a member of the Finnish Parliament representing the Åland Islands. Thank you for great interventions. And my question will start from what Pekka Toveri said regarding being proactive and the need for being proactive. The challenge of hybrid threats are, of course, they are more challenging to identify than traditional threats. It's easy to see a tank or a warship, but it's more difficult to identify a Buster Magnum or a small craft with fishing tourists, or a Volkswagen transporter going around on remote places where looking at telecommunication sites and so on. So my question is, how could we as society get help from the general public to be vigilant and see those kind of things when strange things or supposedly strange things can happen? How could we integrate that? And also, when Pekka Toveri said that you see a vessel going around somewhere, there are lots of enthusiasts that are following marine traffic, for example, and are quite good civilians to analyze things. How could we as a society take that on board in our approach, or is that feasible at all? And how can we ask also the public, without being too alarmist, to lean in and help our societies?
Well,
or is it a bad question?
It's not a bad question, but Pekka would be in the best position to answer it because Finland has one of the best whole of society approaches to this this question of any country that I know of.
Yeah, we're in a pretty good position on this to many historical reasons. You know, Finns, we are a very homogeneous country, well-educated population, and we have general conscription. So we have a lot of people walking around who are a bit, let's say, more defense-minded than an average Western country, and with suspicious about anything coming from East. So it creates environment where it's very easy for people to contact authorities and tell, well, this and this is happening, you know, and just giving the hints. And it's very important and very valuable. How to make it happen NATO-wide, well, I don't know. I'm not a cultural expert to know how to tell Spaniards without creating a panic that, well, you should start informing if you see something suspicious. But I think that it's a good, great, helpful thing, but I still think that the most important thing is cooperation between authorities and sense-making from the all huge data we can collect from different sources and different sensors and make sense out of it. And again, wargaming, red teaming about possible threats, because everything that Russia has done has been predicted and wargamed, but it never has become actual activities to then start looking in that possible threat and to be proactive in stopping it.
But this is not mutually exclusive to educate your public, not to alarm them, not to point fingers at any country, but to educate everyone about their own interest in keeping public safety, right? Not just authorities. Ine?
Well, I think it's a very interesting question, and I think there is one additional point to what Pekka is saying about people telling the authorities what they're seeing if they're seeing something suspicious. I think it is as much right now about telling our citizens what to expect of a hybrid situation, and especially on the information side. What has been going on for at least since the invasion of Ukraine, but even long before that, has been to try to use information, disinformation, propaganda, polarization, fake news to divide as much as possible. And unless we, in a way, educate people in what they are seeing, to tell them what this is all about, it will be difficult for people not to understand what they are being subject to. And just one small example from the COVID dealings for all governments. When we were in government, it was a point in itself to try to be as open as possible about all the dilemmas, the things we needed to do, how we needed to adjust things, just to make sure that there were little fertile ground for conspiracy theories to grow. And if you look at countries right now in Europe, I'm quite concerned actually that there are many countries where authorities are alerting that we could see social unrest as a part of the energy crisis, the food prices increasing, inflation, interest rates, and so forth. And unless you then communicate with your public about what this is, who's sending these messages, what are their goals, then it's going to be very difficult as well. And if you look at the countries who had a lot of demonstrations and a lot of resistance during the pandemic, it's much the same countries who will now face the challenges with energy crisis and Russia's use of energy as a tool to try to sow division within countries and to undermine trust in governments. And it seems like it doesn't really matter what the topic is, whether it's a pandemic or it's the energy issues. But the fertile ground that has been sowed in many countries for this to grow is what needs to be dealt with. And then we have to be very open in our public conversation about this to tell people what they're seeing.
I just want to do something a bit unorthodox, and she's completely not expecting this, but Mina Olander, can you just tell people a little bit about the fellows? This is, if anyone isn't following this on Twitter, there is an extraordinarily effective grassroots effort now on Twitter to debunk. And this did not come from authorities. This came from sharp people watching these videos that were lies. And Mina's a fellow. And Mina, could you just stand up and just briefly explain this? And I'm sorry to call on you. I was trying to get your attention, but I couldn't. So tell people how this came about, because it's really interesting and it's really effective in helping counter disinformation. And nobody could have organized that from the top.
Thanks, you totally disrupted my twittering.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Mina Olander is a new staff member here at FIA, so I'm also happy to introduce her to everyone.
So I am research fellow at FIA here. And as you mentioned, I'm also a NAFO fellow. The NAFO is the so-called North Atlantic Fellow Organization. It's a grassroots movement of Shiba Inus who counter Russian nonsense on social media, especially on Twitter. You can recognize the fellas in their avatars, which are these funny Shiba Inu, you can make a wish what type of a picture you want to have. Mine has a Pikachu tail, for example. Anyways, so this started out as the Georgian Legion in Ukraine, collecting money for their support to Ukraine. And it got increasingly popular. People would donate to the Georgian Legion or other aid organizations, and then they would get this kind of a fella and would become part of this movement. And the idea is to kind of troll back, troll Russian trolls back, and that way stop it from spreading. It's been quite effective, actually. One of the favorite targets of NAFO has been the Russian ambassador Ulyanov at OSCE. He's at OSCE. Yeah, right. So that has been quite an effective way of exposing all this mis and disinformation and pointing out when it's literally nonsense that's being pronounced. But we have here quite a lot of other fellas too, so just ask William, Bentalis, Jessica Berlin, or others.
And that's hashtag NAFO for anyone who wants to start following it now.
Exactly,
right?
So that's pretty much it.
And it's gotten so popular that Kaja Kallas actually changed her avatar for a day on Twitter because she wanted to respect how much work in counter-disinformation she had been doing. And they were calling on Sanna Marin, but I forgot to ask her yesterday if she was going to change her avatar for a day. Andrew Mishta, we failed to call on you last night, so please take the floor. And thanks, Mina. Go back to tweeting about us now, please.
Thank you for a fascinating panel, Andrew Mick, the Marshall Center. I have a very practical question, because we were talking about strategic issues and whatnot. With the two countries entering NATO, and actually, if you look at the infrastructure, north-south connectivity, military mobility, right? Are your governments thinking seriously about this? You remember, Teri, last Munich Security Conference, I think when Secretary Pompeo, previous administration, raised the issue of the US, putting in about $1 billion into the 3 Seas initiative. Why am I bringing this up? During the Cold War, every bridge and road in Germany was rated to carry a tank on a trailer. Overpasses. Tanks are bigger, trailers are heavier. Are you thinking in those practical terms? And I'm not just thinking, via Baltica and the infrastructure that's being developed, but most of the legacy infrastructure in Europe runs east-west. And we need to build this with now connecting the high north, the Baltics, and down into the Black Sea area. That is a critical question. What are your governments doing about it? Thank you.
That's a very practical question. If Ben Hodges were here, he would rail on about the lack of military mobility. And I mean, this has been something where there hasn't been enough progress. You can make all the political decisions you want, but if you can't get a tank between country A and country B, what are you going to do? François, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm obviously not going to be in a position to answer for the governments which have just been called upon by Andrew. But on the general issue of mobility from one end of the theater to the other, in whichever direction, this is actually an area which has become very different from the Cold War. During the Cold War, yes, it was about bridges, it was about, and it was indeed about NATO standards. There was no European Union and so on. Now we have a single market, we have regulatory regimes, national and European, which are major impediments, if left to their own devices, on strategic mobility. And the solution, such as it is going to come out mainly from the European Union, or at least it should.
The money, anyway.
Well, the money and the rule, the workarounds around the rules, because that's what it means. How do we work around the rules which make it difficult to move stuff from one country to another? This is one of the paradoxes of the single market, is that it actually makes movement sometimes more difficult because norms are heavier, more numerous in more areas than before, and they impact military traffic. So this is typically the sort of place where the Americans should actually be yearning for the EU to do more and ask us to do more, and sometimes they do, and if they do, they're right to do so. That's certainly one aspect, and the other aspect is that indeed the European Union has to work on this in an integrated manner and in a stable manner, because we've had these ups and downs in terms of the funding. Of the transit initiative. I always forget the exact name, but that initiative should have stable forward planning and not be subjected to the vagaries of moving from 10 billion to 0 and
which the Finnish presidency did, by the way.
Of course.
Finns.
And the folks here are serious, and the fear of remaining in the cul-de-sac, to use Pekka's expression, is a very strong motivator in that sense. So that's my little pitch for the EU on this one.
Well, they have been working on this. There have been working groups on this forever. They put it under EPA.
No. I mean, Europe produces working groups like
true.
Others produce sugar beets. But what one would want to see is actual results and outcomes over the next few years. The EU is a bit like Nordefco. I love Nordefco, but it's not Nordefco which is going to be doing the heavy lifting. The heavy lifting is going to be done by NATO. And the same is true for transit. The heavy lifting is going to be done, if it is done at all, is going to be done by the EU.
You know, a couple of years ago, now I can't remember the name of the NATO exercise, but in Trondheim, and there were, this was one of the purposes, was to see how fast could heavy equipment be moved to Norway, and there were summer tires heading into Norwegian winter and this kind of thing. What did we learn from that?
I think actually we learned a lot, and
what did we do after that? You.
Yeah. Me or you?
Yeah, not me, you.
Well, I think it's fair to say that it was a bit of a wake-up call as well. I think everyone knew the problem that you are highlighting, that military mobility has been an issue in NATO for years. I think Stoltenberg, as Secretary General, has been working, I would say, very well on this over the past 3 to 4 years, and even a little bit before that, together with the EU. First and foremost, then, taking away all the formalities of crossing borders, which is the easy part of all of this. The difficult part has been the actual movement of equipment. We're taking part now, even though we're not an EU member, as all of you know, we're taking part in one project in PESCO, military mobility. The US does too. Canada does too. And I think the idea here is, and everything has not been shaped yet, but the idea here is to actually work on those very, very practical issues that has to do with the width of a road, the ability to take heavy equipment. And in Nordefco, François, I just wanted to add one thing on Nordefco. Since it came out a little bit as if you didn't think Nordefco could do any heavy lifting. And to a certain extent, I agree with you. It has to be done in NATO, it has to be done in the EU. But one of the things that we did in the wake of the annexation of Crimea was not only to start discussing security policy in NORDEFCO, which had never been discussed before, we also started to do some practical things like using each other's air bases in a time of crisis, which is one of those kind of mobility issues, starting in the small, but still some of these mobility issues that can be worked on very practically if you just sit down and consider what you have, what you need to be done, and how to move things around. And it is better now than it was, even though we still have a little bit of a way, literally, to go.
Yeah. Jesper, you wanted to talk about that?
It was basically that very point about the importance of military mobility that we have focused on in NATO. But I think that the EU part of this is very important, because I actually think that this is where the EU has some added benefit, added value that NATO cannot provide, because rules and regulations that takes place within EU. And I can only confirm to the person who asked the question that this is an area where there is increasing focus. We just had a large exercise exactly of host nation support in our Esbjerg harbor, receiving US military aid exactly to make sure that the logistical part of this runs faster. If the question was not only related to military, because I thought it was broader, Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. I would also point to the focus on energy infrastructure, where we are, have a competition, a race against time to connect the Nordics, the Baltic countries to the rest of the European grid. I think this is another area of focus which is extremely important and has only become more important in light of what happened the last year.
William Alberca, you have a question? Oh, sorry. Oh, Pekka, sorry.
Well, from the Finnish perspective, we have, ever since the end of Second World War, we have a 77-year of experience of moving military within Finland from south to north a lot. I spent a lot of time on north of Arctic Circle during my career. And ever since 2015, we have had more and more our NATO partners, future allies, exercising in Finland. And my personal opinion is the biggest problem is not the infrastructure. Biggest problem is the Finnish authorities on our borders, because we have a lot of different regulations, and I disagree that the Finnish civilian authorities are extremely good in reading the regulations and stick to them. So to get the mindset moving, that will actually have military coming in with live ammunition, with actually food, which is a bit different than Finnish food, and getting them in the country. After that, everything is easy. But one thing is that if you talk about moving a lot of military, for example, to up north, if we are talking about Nordic defense, well, one of the fastest routes, of course, is to take them by ship to somewhere Oulu, Kemi area. And there, if it's winter time, we run into troubles. But luckily, as Tero Valleste is here, we have the second biggest icebreaker fleet in the world in Finland. Sweden must be third or fourth. And that's actually one capability where Russia is overwhelming up north, and the United States has two. So that's something to think about also in the future when we are members, that there's a capability which can be very useful. Yeah.
Okay, but I would point out that these are exactly the same lines that we've been hearing for years and years and years. It's getting better. We're working on it, but I don't see why it's not seen as more urgent. But anyway, just my comment. William, and first, and then okay, and then.
Thank you.
William
Alberk from the International Institute for Strategic Studies. When I think about NORDEFCO and Nordic-Baltic cooperation, there were three major impediments. The first being Finnish and Swedish non-membership in NATO, which we're addressing. The second being the Danish opt-out, which has been addressed. The third is when Norway and Denmark joined NATO, there was a unilateral letter sent by each to the Soviet Union on restrictions of NATO cooperation on their territory, foreign basing, equipment, troops, certain areas where they weren't allowed to go. Are those still holding, or have they been lifted formally or informally? I've never had any clarity on that. And once lifted, I think that really helps in terms of Nordic-Baltic.
And are Finland and Sweden asking for some of the same exceptions? If I could add that. You know?
I can start. Well, you're absolutely right that it was a unilateral decision from Norway's side, and it has, from the Russian side, of course, been portrayed as an agreement, which, of course, it is not. And it is about not having foreign bases, permanent bases for foreign soldiers on our soil. And there are also some restrictions on the exercise activity going east and so forth. The reasons for having them, and I think largely they have served us well in two senses. One is that it has allowed us to operate relatively freely in the areas we need to operate to collect intelligence and to know what the Russians are doing. So the fact that we've been able to operate in that sense has given us a lot of information that has proven extremely valuable to the alliance, because no one else could have collected them in the same way. And I think for us to do much of that with the Norwegian signature has been important. So that's a part of the reason for this. As things are now, I think that everyone's assessing how we best can defend not only Norway from our perspective, but NATO as an alliance. I don't foresee that there will be any changes in the self-imposed restriction on having foreign bases. But it is not, and that is extremely important to underline, it is not a restriction on NATO troops exercising and doing practices in Norway. So what we have said very clearly is that the flip side of the coin of having these base restrictions is that allies are very often in Norway, often long-term in Norway, to do exercise and training, because the conclusion would otherwise be probably to have bases. So that has been our way of dealing with this, and I think largely it has been a good decision. But of course, right now we will probably see even more allied activity in our areas, and of course, for us that is also important. It marks very clearly that NATO's area of responsibility stretches up until the far north. And it is important to underline that, because there are voices who are trying to say that, well, it is restricted, NATO should not be there. Yes, NATO should. It's part of NATO's area of responsibility.
Jesper?
Oh, just for clarification, because you also asked for Denmark, we have no limitations on our NATO membership. The only limitation, if you can say that, is that we have a policy of no nuclear weapons in peacetime. And it is true that Russia has been trying incorrectly to assert publicly that there are limitations to presence in Bornholm, on the island, from an exchange of notes going back to right after the Second World War. But this has no legal ground in Denmark. And then thirdly, we have, just like other countries, Norway and Finland, so we have started our with regard to the policy of having no permanent troops stationed on Danish soils, we now have started our DCA negotiations with the United States. And we very much hope to have a bilateral agreement, just like other countries are entering, within the foreseeable future.
And we have just also recently signed a supplementary defense cooperation agreement with the US that builds on more than 70 years of this cooperation. It doesn't mean basis, but it means that we are deepening and further deepening our cooperation with the US, which is good, I think, for allied security as well.
Pekka, this was the Norwegian exception, or the Danish exception, was something that was brought up a lot in the Finnish debate about whether to join. So what I should know this off the top of my head, but I don't. What did Finland, where did that end? Where did that land? Do you know? I know you're not in government at the moment, but where did that land with Finland?
Well, there's much better experts to talk about that, because I've been retired for a year and a half. But as our president yesterday said in his speech, there's no limit. Finland don't go to negotiations by starting that we have this and these restrictions. There's no restrictions laid out from Finland's side on this issue. And overall, I think that more than being ex-military, I think that more than having a permanent basis, it's more important to have a great military mobility capability, which is exercised all the time, because that gives unpredictability towards your opponent on what's going to happen and how we are acting.
And Kristi, isn't this, this is so funny, because in Estonia, the constant refrain is, can't we have permanent bases?
Indeed, yes, this has been a major issue, of course, for the Baltic states. I just wanted to make one little remark on Finland and Norway. I have also followed with interest how Finland has been looking to Norway as a model in thinking about its own future relationship with NATO, but the conclusion has been indeed not to pose any restrictions. But one difference between Finland and Norway is that Russia never saw Norway as even potentially part of its sphere of influence. So this is a different situation with regard to Finland, which has been part of the Russian Empire in history. But now on Estonia and the Baltic states, and the presence of NATO troops, US troops, this was again, of course, very much debated ahead of the Madrid summit in June. But the important thing really was to achieve this shift from the logic of tripwire through the enhanced forward presence to have deterrence to actually forward defense. And this is something that we have now in the NATO declarations. It's yet to be put fully into practice, and we are looking forward to the new defense plans to be agreed at the next NATO summit. But in terms of rhetoric and the thinking in NATO, it has changed. But the issue is now perhaps not so much about permanent presence, but the focus is more on having clarity about, there are structures, there is the divisions that are there to come in if the Baltic states are under attack, that to know exactly who is coming, how it is going to happen, and not that they necessarily need to be permanently present on the ground in the Baltics, but that the plans are very clear and everyone knows in NATO how they are going to be implemented on day one of possible attack.
Well, as long as the NATO-Russia Founding Act was sort of holding NATO more to stick to the words of it, you couldn't say permanent. So now that nobody believes the NATO-Russia Founding Act is in any way an active document, I think that freed up NATO a lot, didn't it, to talk about what it was going to do with future presence.
Well, NATO-Russia Founding Act, it's a strange issue in the NATO discussions that there has been no readiness to kind of formally declare it dead, but in practice, de facto, everyone acknowledges that it has no impact whatsoever on what NATO actually does.
And you can see that in the fact that they're starting to talk about permanent and long-term presence, where before they felt less able to do that. François, you wanted to say?
Yeah, it would seem to me that in the current day and age, we have an absolute premium on adaptability and flexibility, and the manner indeed in which one has moved from the restrictions of the Founding Act to tripwire and now to forward defense is actually quite a good example of that. And the sort of permanent, even if they were unilateral, regimes which Denmark and Norway implemented, I think the time for that is past. And I was quite interested yesterday by President Niinistö's form of words concerning Finland. He said Finland will be part of NATO, a full member, nothing more, nothing less, no reservations. Would it be a good idea or not? And here I turn towards our Nordic neighbors, and maybe there may be a Swede or two in the room. Whether it wouldn't make sense to have some sort of Nordefco country statement about the fact that it was plain vanilla NATO, and that we adapt a given policy to specific circumstances as the circumstances may warrant, rather than pinning oneself down with commitments of the sort which were quite appropriate during the Cold War. I mean, I agree with everything that was said about how useful it was for Norway to have its, what was it called in those days? Non-provocative defense. I remember that formula on my first visit to Norway in 1982, and Denmark in its own way. But I think the time for that is truly past. Simply saying it's NATO, it's NATO, it's NATO. Don't make it complicated.
We have another question from the audience. There's a microphone coming.
Thank you much. Jari Vilen from the Finnish Minister of Foreign Affairs and Ambassador for the Barents, but I think I'd rather ask a question as a Laplander, coming and born and raised in Lapland in North Finland. Maybe just two comments and one question. First of all, only a few weeks ago when Finland sent the application for the NATO, the Norwegian troops crossed the Finnish land border to go to the garrisons in Norway, which demonstrated the quality and fact of how the infrastructure really is changing and how it already has changed completely. Another small thing, what happened last summer, for the first time since 1809, the Swedish troops were put under the Finnish command when they crossed the border from Sweden to come to military exercises to Finland. And you know what was the biggest challenge for the troops? I was talking to the commander of these troops. To have a car inspections in the Finnish and Swedish borders to check that the Swedish tanks has the blinkers and they have fire extinguishers inside their tanks. According to the colonel, this was the biggest challenge because he had to find the people to do these inspections.
No rules on haircuts, because that used to be the joke between the Finnish and Swedish militaries.
But just telling you that yes, it works, and he was able to do that. But he said the biggest problem he had really would make sure that he will fulfill the legal requirements about checking and inspecting the cars and tanks. But it worked. But the question actually, which you have touched upon a bit about that is, there's a certain soul searching if you look in the Finnish news that what kind of NATO membership Finland will be. The President very clearly said that there's no restrictions at all. But are we the NATO members who relies on the Norway and Denmark and together with Sweden? Are we the NATO member state who looks particularly to the Baltic states and Poland? And actually, maybe to all of you except to Pekka, the question that how would you foresee the Finnish membership in the NATO? What kind of position and role would we like to have? This is a question that is also put forward to our foreign ministers many times, and maybe you can help him also with your answers. Thank you.
And just to add from the NATO side, that I'm not speaking for NATO, but because I cover it, that the Secretary General has been very, very forthcoming in saying how much NATO will learn from the Finns and Swedes. So certainly it's been in his interest to point out that these are not takers, they're providers. Who else would like to answer that question?
I can start.
Okay.
And I think that the expectation is quite unanimous among NATO members that both Sweden and Finland would be providers of security and add to something that we have been doing together with Sweden and Finland for years and years already as the closest partners of the alliance. And I think that what people meaning countries and the organization is looking forward to is actually to do that cooperation without any caveats. And I think that actually will inject also some new thinking into how we can do more of a regional posture under the same defense planning and umbrella. And I remember well when I started out as defense minister in 2013, there was a lot of skepticism within NATO to the Nordic Defense Cooperation. Partly, I think, because both Sweden and Finland also wanted to have so-called solidarity clauses and security guarantees that we could not provide because we were NATO members, you were not NATO members. But as soon as that was kind of put aside, after the annexation of Crimea, when NATO turned around more or less completely, understanding the threat was a bit different compared to what it had been, then suddenly the idea of a closer cooperation regionally was not as frightening anymore. On the contrary, it was seen as something that could strengthen NATO. Taking on board valuable partners like Sweden and Finland was more important than it had been. So I think even already at that point, it started to be more integrated. And I think that when we now can kind of take off all the caps to that, it's going to be very good. And I think both Sweden and Finland would be extremely valuable members of the alliance, bringing something into it that we have been lacking for the last part of being able to do everything together in defense posture, in crisis, in war, if that happens.
Jesper, anything to add to that?
Well, just on the part of the Finnish profile, I think it was asked. I'm certainly have no authority. I'll let Finland talk about Finland's profile in NATO. But what I do want to say, building on what Ine is saying, is the very, very capable new members that we are receiving within the alliance. And just one data point, which I think is very illuminating, when Finland and Sweden becomes member of NATO, the Nordic countries in NATO, to my understanding, has more than 500 military planes. It's more than 200 fighter jets. No other NATO allies has that amount of fighter jets except for the United States. My only warning about talking about this is that NATO cannot and must not be regionalized. I think this is important. It's perfectly okay and fine, and this is what we are doing to talk about what kind of cooperation and so on that we can see among the Nordic countries. But NATO is one for all and all for one, and in the end, unity remains NATO's greatest strength. So we should continue to talk about NATO as a whole and not try to divide it into regions. That's my only footnote here.
Well, this is actually exactly the point that I was also going to make about NATO's collective defense. It's not about one or the other country taking responsibility for defending some allies. And I think the question was posed as should Finland look more to the Nordics or to the Baltics? And I really have a trouble with the question, the way you formulate it, because this is something I would hope Finland would get over. It's not either or. It's the Nordic-Baltic region which already has cooperation, and it has been deepening over years. Now in defense sphere it will further deepen, and we have a common region, so it's not either Nordics or Baltics.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but I would like to, I've been looking at him to see if he would raise his hand. Veteran Finnish diplomat Jaakko Iloniemi finally raised his hand. So, Mr. Iloniemi, former ambassador in Washington, former lots of things.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Just as important as it is to talk about removal or stockpiling of military resources is that we are well equipped with civilian resources such as food and medication and spare parts and that sort of thing.
And willpower.
These are not part of the NATO mission really, but cooperation in these areas is not very good for the time being. We saw during the COVID crisis that new barriers were erected in Europe when nations were trying to protect their national resources and they were not prepared to share them, even in cases where there was an abundance of the necessary stuff. So I would just like to remind that we have to give consideration also to the civilian needs in cases of great crises.
Thank you very much. And we're almost out of time. I would like to pose a final question to my panel and ask each of you for a response. And I had actually hoped that Pavlo Klimkin would be here and do it himself, but he won't. So I'm going to, do I see him back there? Thanks. I mean, I wanted to ask each of you, I mean, the current members of NATO, future members of NATO. Yesterday, President Zelensky announced that although this is not a technical step toward NATO membership, that Ukraine now unequivocally would wanted to be a member of NATO. That's already in their constitution. This is not a surprise. So I had a breakfast discussion with the former foreign minister about what this means. Why now? Is this important? Why is it important for Ukraine? Is it important for NATO? Is it important for Russia to hear this? So just as sort of a provocative way to wrap up our panel, I would like to hear from each of you how you respond to this and your message to the Ukrainians sitting here in our comfortable Helsinki. I'll start with you, François.
Yeah, sure. I think the Ukrainians were right to put the request on the table. It's an important escalatory step in the sense of maintaining escalatory initiative and dominance of the escalation process. And the Americans were right to say we shouldn't examine it now. You asked me for my opinion.
Yeah.
You didn't ask me for your opinion.
No, that isn't my opinion.
I think the Americans were right because we are in an escalatory process. And we do want to keep, I think, ammunition in reserve. Moving on the NATO membership of Ukraine will be a major step in the escalatory ladder. That's not a reason not to take it at the right moment. I'm not sure this is the right moment. We are, once again, when I disapprove of the Americans, I say so highly and loudly and sometimes get reproached for it. But I think the Americans actually did do the right thing. The important thing is that it is now back on the table, and it will not be removed from the table. It can only move forward, it cannot move backwards.
Okay, interesting. But then we're no different than Bucharest.
Yeah.
Kristi?
This worry about escalation is something that has been very much discussed among Western security experts, and I think unfortunately having the consequence of the West really imposing sometimes unnecessary restrictions and being too risk averse in assisting Ukraine and helping Ukraine to win this war. And I agree the timing of Ukraine tabling the application was well chosen. It sends a clear signal as a response to the latest moves by Russia. And we have had quite a few discussions on what possible security guarantees Ukraine might have in future. Well, let's be honest, there can be nothing comparable to membership in NATO. This is the conclusion that Finland and Sweden have come to as a result of the war in Ukraine. And this is also, I think, the future prospect for Ukraine. And we should not really focus on concerns about escalation or waste too much energy on trying to find some alternative security guarantees.
Danish government?
So I'd say on this one, I have 3 brief points. The first one is that Denmark fully supports Ukraine's own right to choose its own future and what organizations it wants to be a member of, and that NATO's doors should remain open. Second point is that the question about membership of NATO is a question that should be resolved between NATO allies and Ukraine and nobody else. And the third point is that right now, at this moment, we are focusing very much on providing massive support, including military support, to Ukraine's fight for its own destiny. And we will continue with this with weapon, equipment, training, and all kinds of other kinds of support.
So this moves the needle not at all there, Denmark? Okay. Pekka, what do you think?
Well, that's my personal opinion is that we've all seen that appeasement doesn't work with dictators. So every time Putin pushes us, we need to push back more. And yes, it's not necessarily good time for Ukraine to join NATO, but to start the process to underline the fact that you have already lost Ukraine, and Ukraine will be part of the Europe, part of the alliance, maybe part of the EU, and it's a very important message for him that every time he does something stupid, he's shooting himself on the left foot.
Okay, Ine? Our final note?
Yep. Well, I can of course not speak on behalf of the current Norwegian government, but I very much agree to what Jesper said about this is an important signaling from Ukraine's side on where they belong and their own choice in aligning with NATO, aligning with the EU. Remember back to 2014, one of the major reasoning behind the process that started the annexation was the association agreement that Ukraine was about to sign with the EU. And the fear that Putin had that this would permanently place Ukraine into the Western sphere. And again, this is, of course, his fear right now, and I think it's right of Ukraine to do so. And of course, what is the challenge right now is how to focus on what we are doing most of the time, most of us right now, aiding Ukraine as best as we can with weapons, with money, with humanitarian assistance, and with political support. And this is important because if I can add one last sentence, my concern now is that we, after time has passed, this 7 months into this war, it will be, in many countries, due to some of the reasons we've talked about, it could be increasingly difficult to muster the same support for all kinds of aid to Ukraine. And we have to be strong and clear and voice how important it is to continue, even more important now than ever, to continue this support. And that also includes the political support to Ukraine.
Thank you so much to all of you. I really enjoyed this. Thank you also to our online audience and, of course, to our audience here at the first Helsinki Security Forum. This was really interesting and informative and just the right topic at just the right time. So thank you, everyone, for being with us.